Hi, everybody. This is Jimmy, and you're reading with Jimmy. We're reading Ernest Hemingway's Farewell to Arms. This is chapters 6, 7, and 8. We left off in the last chapter. He had met Miss Barkley, and he went over to the front, and we're learning more and more about what he does during the war. Drives an ambulance. Chapter 6. I was away for 2 days at the posts. When I got home, it was too late, and I did not see Miss Barkley until the next evening. She was not in the garden, and I had to wait in the office of the hospital until she came down. There were many marble busts on painted wooden pillars along the walls of the room that they used for an office. The hall, too, that the office opened up on, was lined with them. They had the complete marble quality of all looking alike. Sculpture has always seemed a dull business. Still, bronzes looked something like something. But marble busts, they all looked like a cemetery. There was one fine cemetery, though, the one at Pisa. Genoa was a place to see the bad marbles. This had been the villa of a very wealthy German, and the busts must have cost him plenty. I wonder who had done them and how much he got. I tried to make out whether they were members of a family or what, but they were all uniformly classical. You couldn't tell anything about them. Let's think about that for a moment before we proceed. And I want you to notice you could not tell anything about them. They're all marble. I wondered how they've done it and how much he got for doing them. Keep that in mind. Continue. I sat on a chair and held my cap. We were supposed to wear steel helmets even in Gorzia, but they were uncomfortable and too bloody theatrical in a town where the civilian inhabitants had not been evacuated. I wore one when we went up to the posts and carried an English gas mask. We were just beginning to get some of them. They were a real mask. Also, we were required to wear an automatic pistol, even doctors and sanitary officers. I felt it against the back of the chair. You were liable to arrest if you did not have one worn in plain sight. Rinaldi carried a holster stuffed with toilet paper. I wore a real one, and I felt like a gunman until I practiced firing it. It was an Astra 7.65 caliber with a short barrel, and it jumped so sharply when you let it off that there was no question of hitting anything. I practiced with it, holding below the target and trying to master the jerk of the ridiculous short barrel until I could hit within a yard of where I aimed at 20 paces. And then the ridiculousness of carrying a pistol at all came over me, and I soon forgot it and carried it flopping against the small of my back with no feeling at all, except a vague sort of shame when I met English-speaking people. I sat now in the chair, and an orderly came and sort of looked at me disapprovingly from behind a desk while I looked at the marble floor, the pillars with the marble busts, and the frescoes on the wall, and waited for Miss Barkley. The frescoes weren't bad. Any frescoes were good when they started to peel off and flake off. I saw Catherine Barkley coming down the hall, and I stood up. She did not seem tall walking toward me, but she looked very lovely. "Good evening, Mr. Henry," she said. "How do you do?" I said. The orderly was listening behind the desk. "Shall we sit here or go into the garden?" "Let's go out. It's much cooler." I walked her out into the garden, the orderly looking after us. When we were out on the gravel drive, she said, "Where have you been?" I've been out on post. You couldn't have sent me a note?" "No," I said. "Not very well. I thought I was coming back." "You ought to have let me know, darling." We were off the driveway and walking under the trees, and I took her hands and then stopped and kissed her. "Isn't there anywhere we can go?" I asked. "No," she said. "We have to just walk here. You've been away a long time." "This is the third day, but I'm back now." She looked at me. "And do you love me?" "Yes." Before we turned the page, Love is a theme in this book. I want you to keep it in mind, what it is, what's the definition of it. Very, very important. Okay. Also watch the dialogue. He's recording the dialogue. He's the first person narrator in the story. I subtitled this chapter, Getting to Know You. You did say you loved me, didn't you? Yes, I lied. I love you. I had not said it before. This is very important. Don't forget it, right? Yes, I lied. What? He's telling us he lied. He's the first person narrator talking to us, and he's telling us that he's lying. Isn't that interesting? And you call me Catherine? Catherine. We walked away and we were stopped under a tree. Say, I've come back to Catherine in the night. I've come back to Catherine in the night. Oh, darling, you have come back, haven't you? Yes, he said. I said, I love you so, and it's been awful. You won't go away. No, I will always come back. Oh, I love you. Please put your hand there again. It has not been away. I turned her so I could see her face when I kissed her, and I saw that her eyes were shut. I kissed both her shut eyes. I thought she was probably a little crazy. It was all right if she was. I didn't care what I was getting into. This was better than going every night to the house for officers where the girls climbed all over you and you put your cap on backward as a sign of affection between their trips upstairs with brother officers. I knew I did not love Catherine Barkley, nor had any idea of loving her. This was a game, like bridge, in which you said things instead of playing cards. And like bridge, you had to pretend that you were playing for money or playing for some stakes. Nobody had mentioned what the stakes were, and that was all right with me. I wish there was some place we could go, I said. I was experiencing the masculine difficulty of making love very long standing up. There isn't any place, she said. She came back from wherever she had been. I'm going to pause there for a second and ask you, what do you think she came back from wherever she had been? Obviously, her thoughts had strayed. He sensed they had strayed. That's why he wrote this sentence. She came back from wherever she had been. We might as well sit there for just a little while. So we sat on a flat stone bench and I held Catherine Barkley's hand. She would not let me put my arm around her. Are you very tired? She asked. No. She looked down at the grass. This is a rotten game we play, isn't it? What game? The narrator asks. Don't be dull, she says. I'm not on purpose. You're a nice boy, she said, and you play it well as you know how, but it's a rotten game. Do you always know what people think? Not always, but I do with you, she says. You don't have to pretend you love me. That's over for the evening. Is there anything you'd like to talk about? But I do love you, he says, the narrator. Please, let's not lie when we don't have to. I had a very difficult little show, fine little show, but I'm all right now. You see, I'm not mad and I'm not gone off. It's only a little sometimes. I pressed her hand. Dear Catherine, it sounds very funny now, Catherine. You don't pronounce it very much alike, but you're very nice. You're a very good boy. Stop a moment. You don't pronounce it very much alike. What does that mean? Like who? Like her boyfriend that got blown up at the Somme, probably, right? That's what the priest said, the narrator says. Yes, oh, you're very good. And you will come and see me. Of course, the narrator says. And you don't have to say you love me. That's all over for a while. She stood up, put out her hand. Good night. I wanted to kiss her. No, she said. I'm awfully tired. Kiss me, though, I said. I'm awfully tired, darling. Kiss me. Do you want to very much? Yes. We kissed, and she broke away suddenly. No, good night, please, darling. She broke away suddenly. Maybe he was trying to do something besides kiss. We walked to the door, and I saw her go in down the hall. I liked to watch her move. She went on down the hall, and I went home. It was a hot night, and there was a good deal going on in the mountains, so I watched the flashes on San Gabriel. I stopped in front of the Villa Rosa. The shutters were up, but it was still going on inside. Somebody was singing. I went home and Rinaldi came in while I was undressing. Aha, Rinaldi said. It does not go so well. Baby's puzzled. Where have you been? At the Villa Rosa. It was very edifying, baby. We all sang. Where have you been? Calling on the British. Thank God I did not become involved with the British. Chapter 7. I came back the next day from our first mountain post and stopped the car at the seismento, where the wounded and the sick were sorted by their papers and the papers marked for the different hospitals. So sorting, cemento. I had been driving. Notice the narrator, he sticks in Italian words every now and then. He also breaks up the English, like being spoken by an Italian who doesn't know English very well. That's part of the style. I had been driving and I sat in the car and the driver took the papers in. It was a hot day and the sky was very bright and blue and the road was white and dusty. I sat in the high seat of the Fiat and thought about nothing. A regiment went by in the road and I watched them pass. The men were hot and sweating. Some wore their steel helmets, but most of them carried them slung over their packs. Most of the helmets were too big, and they came down almost over the ears of the men who wore them. The officers all wore helmets, better fitting helmets. It was half of the Brigata Basilicata, and I identified them by the red and white striped collar mark. There were stragglers going by long after the regiment had passed, and men who could not keep up with their platoons. They were sweaty and dusty and tired. Some looked pretty bad. A soldier came along after the last stragglers. He was walking with a limp. He stopped and sat beside the road. I got down and went over. What's the matter? He looked at me and then he stood up. I'm going on. What's the trouble? The narrator asks. The war. There's the dash. Is it a pause or is it a swear word? What's wrong with your leg? It's not my leg. I got a rupture. Why don't you ride with the transport? I asked. Why don't you go to the hospital? They won't let me. The lieutenant said I slipped the truss on purpose. Let me feel it. It's way out. Well, which side is it on? Here. I felt it. Cough, I said. I'm afraid it will make it bigger. It's twice as big as it was this morning. Sit down, I said. As soon as I get the papers on these wounded, I'll take you along the road and drop you with your medical officers. But he'll say I did it on purpose. They can't do anything, I said. It's not a wound. You've had it before, haven't you? But I lost my truss. Well, they'll send you to the hospital. Can't I stay here, Tenente? No, I haven't any papers for you. This is important. Okay. So if we go back here for a moment, when he says, what's the matter? He looks up and then he stands up. Why does he stand up? Because the narrator is an officer. Okay. The driver came out of the door with the papers for the wounded in the car, 4 for 105, 2 for 132, he said. They were hospitals beyond the river. You drive, I said. I helped the soldier with the rupture on the seat with us. You speak English, he asked. Sure. How do you like this goddamn war? Rotten, says the narrator. I say it's rotten. Jesus Christ, I say it's rotten. Were you in the States? The narrator asked. Sure, in Pittsburgh. I knew you was an American. Don't I talk Italian good enough? I knew you was an American, all right. Another American, said the driver in Italian, looking at the hernia man. Listen, Lieutenant, do you have to take me to that regiment? Yes, because the captain doctor knew that I had this rupture. I threw away the goddamn trust so it would get bad and I wouldn't have to go to the line again. I see. Couldn't you take me no place else? If it was closer to the front, I could take you to the first medical post, but back here you've got to have papers. If I go back, they're going to make me get operated on, and then they're going to put me in the line all the time. I thought it over. You wouldn't want to go on the line all the time, would you? No, the narrator says. Jesus Christ, ain't this a goddamn war? Listen, I said. You get out, fall down by the road, get a bump on your head, and I'll pick you up on our way back and take you to a hospital. We'll stop by the road here. Aldo? So Aldo is driving, right? We stopped on the side of the road and I helped him down. I'll be right here, Lieutenant, he said. So long, I said. We went on and passed the regiment about a mile ahead and then crossed the river, cloudy with snow water, and running fast through the spires of bridge to right along the road across the plain and deliver the wounded at the two hospitals. I drove back and went fast with an empty car to find the man from Pittsburgh. First, we passed the regiment, hotter and slower than ever, and then the stragglers. And then we saw a horse ambulance stop by the road. Two men were lifting the hernia man to put him in. They had come back for him. He shook his head at me. His helmet was off, and his forehead was bleeding below the hairline. His nose was skinned, and there was dust on the bloody patch and dust in his hair. Look at that bump, Lieutenant, he shouted. Nothing to do. They come back for me. When I got back to the villa, it was 5 o'clock, and I went out where we washed the cars to take a shower. And then I made out my report in the room, sitting in my trousers and an undershirt in front of the open window. In 2 days, the offensive was to start, and I would go with the cars to Plava. It was a long time since I had written to the States, and I knew I should write, but I had to let it go so long, it was almost impossible to write now. There was nothing to write about. I sent a couple of Army Zona de Guerrero postcards, crossing out everything except I am well. That should handle them. Who's them? Think about it. Those postcards would be fine in America, pardon me. Strange and mysterious. This was a strange and mysterious war zone, but I suppose it was quite well run and grim compared to the other wars with the Austrians. The Austrian army was created to give Napoleon victories. Any Napoleon. I wish we had a Napoleon, but instead we had El General Cardona, a fat, prosperous, and Vittorio Emanuele, a tiny man with a long, thick neck and a goat beard. Over on the right, they had the Duke of Asta. Maybe he was too good looking to be a great general, but he looked like a man. Lots of them would have liked to be the king. He looked like a king. Notice the style that's going on here? I'm going to write that down, the style. This is like stream of consciousness, right? Let me write that down, pardon me. Keep that in mind. We were the king's uncle and commanded that he looked like a king. He was the king's uncle, pardon me, and commanded the Third Army. We were in the Second Army. There were some British batteries up with the Third Army. I had met two gunners from that lot in Milan. They were very nice, and we had a big evening. When was he in Milan? Remember when he went on leave? They were big and shy and embarrassed and very appreciative together of anything that happened. I wish that I was with the British. It would have been a much simpler. Still, I would probably have been killed. Not in this ambulance business. Yes, even in this ambulance business. Stream of consciousness. Remember I told you stream of consciousness is usually when he's drinking. He's not drinking yet. But this is preceding this technique that James Joyce created, stream of consciousness, where his thoughts just kind of run on and on and on. British ambulance drivers were killed sometimes. Well, I knew I would not be killed, not in this war. Does he really know that? It did not have anything to do with me. It seemed no more dangerous to me myself than the war in the movies. I wish to God it was over, though. Maybe it would finish this summer. Maybe the Austrians would crack. They had always cracked in other wars. What was the matter with this war? Everybody said the French were through. Rinaldi said that the French had mutinied and the troops marched on Paris. I asked him, what happened? And he said, oh, they stopped them. I wanted to go to Austria without war. I wanted to go to the Black Forest. I wanted to go to the Harz Mountains. Where were the Harz Mountains anyway? They were fighting in the Carpathians. I did not want to go there anyway. It might be good, though. I could go to Spain if there was no war. The sun was going down and the day was cooling off. After supper, I would go and see Catherine Barkley. I wish that she were here now. I wish that I were in Milan with her. I would like to eat at the Cova and then walk down the Via Manzoni in the hot evening and cross over and turn off the canal and go to the hotel with Catherine Barkley. Maybe she would. Maybe she would pretend that I was her boy that was killed, and we would go in the front door, and the porter would take off his cap, and I would stop at the concierge desk, and I would ask for the key, and she would stand by the elevator, and then we would get in the elevator and would go up very slowly, clicking at all floors, and then our floor, and the boy would open the door and stand there, and she would step out, and I would step out, and we would walk down the hall, and I would put the key in the door and open it and go in, and then take down the telephone and ask them to send a bottle of Capri Bianca in a silver bucket full of ice. And you would hear the ice coming against the pail coming down the corridor. And the boy would knock, and I would say, leave it outside the door, because we would not wear any clothes, because it was so hot, and the window open and the swallows flying over the roofs of the houses, and it was dark afterward, and you went to the window, very small bats hunting over the houses and close down over the trees, and we would drink the Capri, and the door locked, and it hot and only a sheet, and the whole night, and we would both love each other all night in the hot night in Milan. And ask you to count those sentences one day. Maybe I'll tell you to count. That's long, huh? That was how it ought to be. I would eat quickly and go and see Catherine Barkley. They talked too much at the mess, and I drank wine because tonight we were not all brothers unless I drank a little, and I talked with the priest about the Archbishop Ireland, who was, it seemed, a nobleman, and with whose the injustices he had received, and I participated as an American, and of which I had never heard, so I feigned acquaintance. It would have been impolite not to have known something of them when I had listened to such splendid explanation of their causes, which were, after all, it seemed, misunderstandings. I thought he had a fine name, and he came from Minnesota, which is a lovely name, Ireland of Minnesota, Ireland of Wisconsin, Ireland of Michigan. What made it pretty was that it sounded like island. No, that wasn't it. There was more to it. By the way, Ireland was known for his progressive stance on education, immigration, relations between the church and state, and the opposition to saloons, alcoholism, political machines. You're talking about Archbishop Ireland. There was more to it than that. Yes, Father. That's true, Father. Perhaps, Father. No, Father. Well, maybe yes, Father. You know more about it than I do, Father. The priest was good, but dull. The officers were not good, but dull. The king was good, but dull. The wine was bad, but not dull. It took the enamel off your teeth and left it on the roof of your mouth. And the priest was locked up, Roca said. New character's name? We can figure out who that is. Because they found the 3% bonds on his person. It was in France, of course. Here, they would never have arrested him. He denied all knowledge of the 5% bonds. This took place in Bréziers. I was there, and I was reading of it in the paper Went to the jail and I asked to see the priest, and it was evident that he had stolen the bonds. I don't believe a word of this, Rinaldi said. Well, just as you like, Roca said. But I'm telling you it for our priest here. It was very informative. He is a priest and he will appreciate it. The priest smiled. Go on, he said. I'm listening. Of course, some of the bonds were not accounted for, but the priest had all of the 3% bonds and several local obligations. I forget exactly what they were. So I went to the jail, and now at this point of the story, I stood outside the cell and I said, as though I were going to confession, "Bless me, Father, for you have sinned." And there was great laughter from everybody. And what did he say? Asked the priest. Roca ignored this, and he went on to explain the joke to me. You see the point, don't you? It seemed it was a very funny joke if you understood it properly. They poured me more wine, and I told the story about the English private soldier who was placed under the shower bath. And then the major told the story of the 11 Czechoslovaks and the Hungarian corporal. And after more wine, I told the story of the jockey who found the penny. And the major said that there was an Italian story, something like that, about the Duchess who could not sleep at night. At this point, the priest left. And I told the story about the traveling salesman who arrived at 5 o'clock in the morning at Marseille when the minstrel was blowing. The major said he had heard a report that I could drink. I denied this. He said it was true, and by the corpse of Bacchus, we would test whether or not it's true. Not Bacchus, I said. Not Bacchus. Yes, Bacchus, he said. I should drink a cup and glass with Bassi Filippo Vincenza. Bassi said that no test because he had already drunk twice. So what they're doing is they're drinking and telling, obviously, jokes. What is the joke here? Bless me, Father, for you have sinned. They changed the pronoun, you, right? Usually it's bless me, Father, for I have sinned. So they're making a joke. They're picking on the priest. So I have had already twice as much as I said that was a foul lie. Bacchus or no Bacchus. Filippo Vincenza Bassi or Bassi Filippo Vincenza had never touched a drop all evening. And what was his name anyway? He said, was my name Frederico Enrico or Enrico Frederico? I said, let the best man win, Bacchus barred. And the major started us with red wine and mugs. Halfway through the wine, I didn't want any more. I remembered where I was going. So the narrator is drinking up a storm here, telling dirty jokes, but we're finding out that his name is Frederico Enrico or Enrico Frederico. Bassi wins, I said. He's a better man than I am. I've got to go. He really does. Rinaldi said, he has a rendezvous, and I know all about it. I have to go, the narrator says. Another night, said Bassi. Another night when you feel stronger. He slapped me on the shoulder. There were lighted candles on the table, and all the officers were very happy. Good night, gentlemen, I said. Rinaldi went out with me. We stood outside the door on a patch, and he said, you better not go up there drunk. I'm not drunk, Rainey, really. You better chew some coffee. Nonsense. I'll get you some, baby. You walk up and down. He came back with a handful of roasted coffee beans. Chew those, baby, and God be with you. Bacchus, I said. I'll walk down with you. I'm perfectly all right. He walked together through the town, and I chewed the coffee. At the gate of the driveway that led up to the British villa, Rinaldi said, good night. Good night, I said. Why don't you come in? He shook his head. No, I like the simpler pleasures. Thank you for the coffee beans. Nothing, baby, nothing. I started down the driveway. The outlines of the cypresses that lined it were sharp and clear. I looked back and saw Rinaldi standing and watching me, and I waved to him. I sat in the reception hall of the villa waiting for Catherine Barkley to come down. Someone was coming down the hallway, and I stood up, but it wasn't Catherine. It was Miss Ferguson. Hello, she said. Catherine asked me to tell you that she was sorry she couldn't see you this evening. I'm so sorry. I hope she's not ill. She's not awfully well. Will you tell her how sorry I am? Yes, I will. Do you think it would be any good to try and see her tomorrow? Yes, I do. Thank you very much. Good night. I went out the door and suddenly I felt lonely and empty. I had treated Catherine very lightly. I had gotten somewhat drunk, and had nearly forgotten to come. But when I could not see her, there was a feeling lonely. I was feeling lonely and hollow. The narrator is revealing to himself throughout this chapter. What have we learned about him? One of the questions to ask yourself, he's feeling lonely and hollow. Is that true? Is that true? He's drunk, right? Or he's saying, I got somewhat drunk. I don't know if you're reading this carefully back here when they're talking about these stories. They're drinking a lot of stuff. There's a lot of drinking in this story. But he's also revealing himself. So he got sidetracked with the drinking instead of going to see Catherine like he said he would. So he gets sidetracked in drinking, and by the time he gets back there, she sent Ferguson's down to tell him that she's not going to be able to see him tonight. Take careful notes and watch with careful consideration what the narrator is doing, because this is the narrator telling us this story. Remember, first-person narrators don't have to tell us everything. They tell us what they want us to know, what they want us to understand, and they have the details of what they want to tell us. So all of this is his detail, including Ferguson, including the drinking, right? Got it? Chapter 8. The next afternoon, we heard that there was to be an attack up the river that night, and that we were to take 4 cars up there. And nobody knew anything about it, although they all spoke with great positiveness and strategic knowledge. I was riding in the first car, and as we passed the entry to the British hospital, I told the driver to stop. The other cars pulled up. I got out and told the driver to go on, and that if we had not caught up to them at the junction of the road at the Cormans, to wait. I hurried up the driveway, and inside the reception hall, I asked for Miss Barkley. She's on duty. Well, could I see her for just a moment? They sent an orderly, and she came back with him. I stopped to ask if you were better. They told me that you were on duty, so I asked to see you. I'm quite well, she said. I think the heat knocked me over yesterday. I have to go. I'll just step out of the door a minute. Are you all right? I asked outside. Yes, darling. Are you coming tonight? No, I said. I'm leaving now for the show up at Plava. A show? I don't think it's anything. And you'll be back? Tomorrow, he said, the narrator says. She was unclasping something from her neck. She put it on my hand. She put it in my hand. It's St. Anthony, she said, and come tomorrow night. You're not a Catholic, are you? No, but they say a St. Anthony is very useful. I'll take care of him for you. Goodbye. No, she said, not goodbye. All right, the narrator says. Be a good boy. Be careful. Don't you kiss me here. You can't. All right. I looked back and saw her standing on the steps, and she waved, and I kissed my hand and held it out, and she waved again, and I was out of the driveway, climbing up into the seat of the ambulance, and we started. The St. Anthony was in a little white metal capsule, and I opened the capsule and spilled him onto my hand. St. Anthony, said the driver. Yes, the narrator says. I have one. His right hand left the wheel and opened the button on his tunic and pulled it out from under his shirt. See? I put my St. Anthony back in the capsule, spilled the thin gold chain together, and put it all in my breast pocket. You don't wear him? No, the narrator says. It's better to wear him. That's what it's for. All right, I said. So I undid the clasp of the gold chain and put it around my neck and clasped it. The saint hung down on the outside of my uniform, so I undid the throat of my tunic, unbuttoned the shirt collar, and dropped him in under the shirt. I felt him in his metal box against my shirt while we drove, and then I forgot about him. After I was wounded, I never found him. Someone probably got it at one of the dressing stations. Stop there for a moment. This is called foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is a technique in writing, whether you're first or third person narrators, where you predict what's going to happen. And that's why careful reading is very, very, very important. So the narrator doesn't wait until he gets wounded to tell us that he's going to get, to show us how he got wounded. He actually tells us that he was wounded. And why does he tell us he was wounded now? Well, he tells us this because of St. Anthony and where his driver who wears St. Anthony. Catherine, who gives him St. Anthony, is very useful. What does St. Anthony do? And you have to look that up. He's probably a patron saint of keeping people safe, right? There's a story that you should, if you're selling your house, you should bury him upside down in your backyard and you'll sell your house faster. St. Anthony is good for a lot of things. But the narrator is saying this after I was wounded, I never found him. This is, again, an important thing. Was he deserted by St. Anthony? Did St. Anthony desert him? Did he not protect him? Because he did get wounded. And again, he got wounded. He didn't get killed, because if he got killed, he couldn't be narrating this, could he? Or could he? Let's think about that. I don't think so. We drove fast when we were over the bridge, and soon we saw the dust of the other cars down the road. The road curved, and we saw the three cars looking quite small, the dust rising from the wheels and going off through the trees. We caught them and passed them and turned off on the road that climbed up into the hills. Driving in a convoy is not unpleasant if you are the first car, and I settled back in the seat and watched the country. Why is it very unpleasant if you're in a convoy and you're not the first car? Can you guess, ladies and gentlemen? Of course. Don't forget the type of roads they're on. Dusty, right? You're going to collect all the dust. Dust is a very important symbol. Don't forget what the leaves are coated with from the war. We were in the foothills on the near side of the river, and as the road mounted, there were the high mountains off to the north with snow still at the tops. I looked back and I saw the three cars all climbing, spaced by the interval of their dust. We passed a long column of loaded mules, the drivers walking along the mules wearing red frezzes. They were the Bersaglieri. The Bersaglieri are troops of marksmen in the Italian infantry corps. Bersaglieri. Beyond the mule train, the road was empty, and we climbed through the hills and then went down the shoulder of a long hill into the river valley. There were trees along both sides of the road, and through the right line of trees, I saw the river, the water clear, fast, and shallow. The river was low, and there were stretches of sand and pebbles with a narrow channel of water, and sometimes the water spread like a sheen over the pebbly bed. Close to the bank, I saw the deep pools, the water blue like the sky. I saw arched stone bridges over the river where the tracks turned off from the road, and we passed stone farmhouses with pear trees, cantilevered against their south walls, low stone in the fields. The road went up the valley for a long time, and then we turned off and commenced to climb into the hills again. The road climbed steeply, going back and forth through dense chestnut woods to the level of finally along the ridge. Do you see how he's using the language to help us feel the ride? Do you understand that? He could have just said we got to where we were going, but he's using the language to make us feel the ride. One of the things, if you haven't guessed about this first-person narrator, is that he wants us to feel what he feels. And the only way he could do that, since it's not a movie, is to let us feel with the words. So he paints with words. We went along the road, new military road that followed the crest of the ridge, and I looked to the north at the two ranges of mountains, green, dark, to the snow line, and then the white and lovely in the sun. Then, as the road mounted along the ridge, I saw a third range of mountains, higher snow mountains that looked chalky white and furrowed with strange plains. And then there were mountains far off beyond all of these that you could hardly tell if they were really there, they really saw. Those were the Austrian mountains, and we had nothing like them. Ahead, there was a rounded turnoff in the road to the right, and looking down, I could see the road dropping through the trees. There were troops on this road, and motor trucks, and mules with mountain guns. And as we went down, keeping to the side, I could see the river far down below, the line of ties and rails running along it, the old bridge where the railway crossed to the other side, and across under the hill beyond the river, the broken houses of the little town that was to be taken. It was nearly dark when we came down and turned onto the main road that ran beside the river. It's unbelievable, beautiful writing, isn't it? He paints this picture of him going to the front, to the war. We know wherever he's going is going to be wounded, the foreshadowing, and it's really what you're going to think about in this chapter and throughout this thing is war and the meaning of war. That's one of the things you'll be thinking about. Well, Jimmy, what do you mean? War is, it's just conflict. Of course it is, but what does it really mean? He's an ambulance driver. His job is to take the wounded back to hospitals. He's fighting in the war, but he's not really fighting. But we know from his narration already that he has to carry a pistol, otherwise he's in trouble. But he puts it on his back. He doesn't think much of his pistol. They drink a lot. They drink a lot probably, to forget or whatever they're doing. So it's a different experience, and he's painting this picture from his experience as an ambulance driver, the Lieutenant Henry Frederico, right? So you've been reading with Jimmy. This is Jimmy. So thanks for visiting. Learn more by watching the next reading of Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. And be sure to visit the other classics that we have on the website. In the meantime, you may have questions about this couple of chapters. And if you do, or if you want to make a comment, you want to make a statement, Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com, Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Thanks so much for listening, and see you soon. Have a great day. By the way, that thunder you may have heard in this reading, I didn't plan that. That just kind of happened. Curious.